Hey everybody, this is Annie with a short pre-roll announcement. Stay tuned after the closing music for a conversation with someone who did something wonderful for you and me to make it easier to find our way around all the many places that we've talked about on the show. And we will continue to talk about on the show. So that's after the closing music. And now on with the show. This is Join Us in France, episode 40. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
40 times already.
I know. We've been doing quite a few of these. On today's show, we visit the area of Saint Émilion near Bordeaux. Mm-hmm. It's gorgeous. It has a lot to offer, especially for wine lovers. But even if you're not a wine lover, there is a lot for you to see there. It's a UNESCO World Heritage site. It's got a lot of unique architecture. Gastronomy is not bad. Anyway, it's got a lot to offer.
So a lot.
We'll get into it in a moment to find the notes, the photos, the recipes, if we get any. Probably we will at some point. Go to joinusinfrance.com / and the number 40. And now a little music to get us in the mood, and we'll go and talk about Saint Émilion. Okay, we're back. Are you ready to talk about wine?
Not just wine.
Not just wine. That's true. There's a lot more to it than
Right.
the wine.
I think that part of the thing about doing a podcast about Saint Émilion is that immediately most people listening are going to assume that we're going to be talking about wine. But one of the reasons that I thought it would be a nice subject for the podcast is that not only is it one of the most well-known wine growing and developing regions, but it's also a beautiful, beautiful small town.
It is very nice.
And the region is absolutely gorgeous. So situate Saint Émilion. Saint Émilion is actually northeast of Bordeaux. It's in a region, the region itself is called the region of Saint Émilion. It's near a small city called Libourne.
Yeah.
Which is very pretty also. And all of this, of course, is in the region called Aquitaine.
Right.
So this is in the Aquitaine region.
Right.
And it's part of this very, very ancient wine growing area, but it's also a region that is gorgeous. And even if you don't drink wine, it's worth making a stop and visiting Saint Émilion, and it's worth driving through the region. This is one of those places where it's really worth it if you have any access to a car.
Yeah.
You can take a train or a bus from Bordeaux, and you can also, if you are interested and you are staying in Bordeaux, there are many, many excursions that are full-day excursions that leave the tourist office in Bordeaux that give you a tasting, usually at one or two vineyards, and also a guided history tour of the old city. But the region is magnificent. It's very sunny a lot, which of course has a lot to do with the fact that it's famous for the quality of its wines. And Saint Émilion is very, very special. So among other things, because this whole region is like that has to do with the wine, it's an area that's got lots and lots of limestone, which means that the buildings everywhere in the entire region, basically all of Aquitaine, which is the southwest part of France, is all made of stone.
Right.
Very beautiful, beautiful stone. And I think that many people I think know, that where there's limestone, there are usually good grapes.
That's right.
They go together.
Yes.
So it's because, of course, the limestone has to do with the calcium content in the land. And it's because it used to be apparently millions of years ago under the ocean or under the seas. And so it has developed. And the other thing that makes this area interesting is that, like Paris, which we've just talked about in terms of it being a kind of Swiss cheese, this is a region that has lots of limestone cliffs with things dug into them. You know, so the town
Lots
of
of
Saint
quarries.
Émilion, lots of quarries. Saint Émilion is a town that has a permanent population of about 2,000.
Yeah.
I don't know anymore.
Village?
Village. When you see it, it doesn't seem like a village. It's, it's that the nice English word town somehow suits. It's not quite as small as a village. It's also a place, in spite of being only 2,000 people, that has an average of 1 million visitors a year.
Right.
And that is enormous.
Yes.
Absolutely enormous. And most people, of course, come because they want to do wine tastings, but they've also heard that it's beautiful. And so they walk around it.
I live in a village that's about 2,000 people, and we don't get 1 million visitors.
This is 2,000 people here?
Yes, this village is about 2,000 people.
Well, I guess it's because it's also scattered, right? Because Saint
Yeah.
Émilion is built as
Yeah.
Saint Émilion is of course a centered. It's medieval, so it's very
much
compact.
older. Whereas
right?
this village is probably from the 1800s, late 1800s.
And it's 2,000 people, huh?
Yes, it is.
Well. Wouldn't have guessed that, So, Saint Émilion.
Yeah, I live
Saint
in the
Émilion.
boonies.
Yeah, it's not really the boonies. Well, it's a boonie banlieue, as they would say in French. This region, which is an ancient part of what is called Aquitaine, lovely, huge region, a huge province. Eleanor of Aquitaine, I'm sure everyone has heard of. She was the Duchess of Aquitaine. This is an area that has been inhabited, and there's evidence of inhabitation for many, many, many years. It's a place that has, believe it or not in Saint Émilion, but in the region, a few caves that have prehistoric drawings in them. So this takes us back to about 17,000 BC.
Wow.
And I guess they assume that all the areas of what we call France, where there were lots of limestone caves and cliffs, which means the Loire Valley and the Aquitaine area and the Pyrenees, all of these areas, of course, were inhabited going back very, very far in the Paleolithic times.
Wow.
And then Saint Émilion was, believe it or not, a Roman villa. What is a villa? Well, in the Roman times, a villa was a plantation. It was a place that was a huge, enormous agricultural enterprise.
I see.
With slaves. And the villa that was in Saint Émilion, well, the Romans had slaves.
They did.
They had slaves. Their slaves weren't as bad off as the Greek slaves, by the way. But many of them were eventually freed, and the category was much more fluid, let's put it that way, than it was in other civilizations. But the Roman villa in the area that is now the area of what we call Saint Émilion was developed to produce wine. So guess what? That means that winemaking goes back almost 2,000 years in this region. And it was because the Romans, when they arrived there, realized that, like in parts of Italy, it had the perfect climate, the perfect soil, and they just had brought their little cuttings with them, and they started
That's right.
producing wine.
Makes perfect sense to me.
Makes perfect sense to me, too. Really does. Yeah. And then what happens is that in the, let's say, the early part of the Christianization of France, there were lots and lots of places where there were hermits. It's interesting that the whole idea of a hermit, apparently it's an idea that came from Palestine and the Jerusalem area. But, there was communication, even if it was very much slower than it is today. And as Christian communities developed, the idea of creating a hermitage was very, very popular. And so in the 700s, there was a monk named Émilion, who came from the city of Vannes in Brittany.
Okay.
Which is a lovely place that we need to talk about one of these days soon.
Yep.
And he decided to become a hermit. He was a monk who belonged to the Benedictine order. And he had gone south from Brittany to the Charente area, which is just north of this area around Saint Émilion.
Yeah.
And he had apparently lived for a while in a monastery. And then after a certain number of years, I'm not sure exactly how many, he decided that he wanted to be a hermit.
A hermit.
A hermit, yeah. It's very interesting, the concept, right? And he went further south, and he went to this area that we know of now as Saint Émilion, which is very interesting because if you arrive by bus or by car, coming from the west or coming from the southwest, you actually arrive at the top level, and that's where the city hall is and everything. And then the ancient part of the city is down below. You have to take these steps down below. And what this man, Émilion, did was whether the cave existed already, probably, but who knows exactly, he created an underground troglodyte space for himself in these cliffs of Saint Émilion. And he carved out, the limestone there is so soft that you can actually do this with just a little trowel. He carved out a little altar space, and he made his little underground living space there. But, of course, the irony of all of this is that once other people who wanted to be hermits found out that this is where he was living and that it was a very hospitable place to live.
To be a hermit.
Yes. They decided to do the same thing.
Oh, there you go.
And there you go. And so they came down to...
He set a trend.
He set a trend. And they came down. And after about 16 or 17 more of these monks had arrived...
Oh, that's not a hermit anymore if there's 17 of them.
No, it becomes a monastery.
That's right.
It just becomes a monastery. And so what happened was that together they dug out more and more of this cliff that is in the city center of Saint Émilion. And they made, little by little, over a certain amount of time. It wasn't during his lifetime that was done. It was actually something that took several hundred years. But in the time that all of these monks lived in this monastery that was largely underground, they created this enormous, magnificent underground church.
Oh,
and
wow.
What happens is when you arrive in Saint Émilion, there are actually several different directions you can arrive from. But if you arrive from the top part, where there are two big parking areas, you go down this huge steep set of stairs and you arrive down in the lower part where there are some very beautiful little narrow streets and beautiful medieval houses, very well taken care of. It's a wealthy area. And you enter into the Gothic doorway that is now the construction that takes you into the underground church, which I've been in about 5 or 6 times now, I think. And it's really rather impressive. It's enormous for an underground structure. It has a nave, it has side aisles, it has columns. This is not work that was brought in to be set up. This was literally...
They dug it up.
Dug out. This is carved out of the limestone underground.
Wow.
And there are 2 of 3 altar spaces. There's a teeny little bit left of vestiges of fresco, not very much. I think there was some infiltration of water over the centuries, which must make it very difficult.
It's a natural cave. So
it's a natural cave to begin with.
I mean, natural. They dug it up, but I mean, it's underground. It's nature. The water will come down.
But what there is, which has been maintained, and now, of course, that the entire city of Saint Émilion has been made a World UNESCO Heritage Site, they do, of course, a lot of work to make sure that it's maintained.
Sure.
There are some relief carvings on the columns in the oldest part of the altar spaces in the back that take us back probably to about the 800s. So it's fascinating to walk through. It's a little bit strange. There's an entrance way that is, of course, very elaborate now because the outer part they've added on a little bit to the outer side. This very beautiful photo that we can put up of the outer entranceway. And they've even later on in the 1100s added a church tower that's on the outside, of course. But the main part of the church is indeed underground, and it's enormous when you think about the fact that this is just carved out of the rock.
Wow. And the monks did it.
And the monks did it.
Wow.
The monks did it themselves. This was part of their daily work. This is part of what they did. They had time for work and time for prayer, and this is what they did.
And when did they eat? And what did they eat?
What they ate, I have no idea. But most likely, hermits, not hermits.
Don't eat much.
No, monks in the different orders they have different rules. The Benedictines were an order that was enormously important all over France in the Middle Ages. They had the most monasteries anywhere. They were a fairly wealthy order until what is called the Gregorian Reform, which was in about the year 1100. From about the year 800 to 1100, the Benedictines had rules that were relatively loose. These are not monks that were vegetarians. These were not monks that lived a very strict life of silence. They had a very orderly life, as most of these monks in these monasteries did. You know, there was a time, every morning you got up at a certain time, usually pre-dawn. You had certain prayers, then you had a breakfast, then you had activity, then you had prayer, and then everything is very set. There's a very strict time of the day for everything. But the Benedictines were not like the Cistercians, who were an order where there was a lot of severe silence, and the Benedictines had a certain savoir-vivre, which actually got them into trouble by the 1100s, you see. But this particular monk had the honor, without knowing it, obviously, because it came after his death, of being beatified and becoming a saint, and then having the monastery named after him, so that the monastery was called Saint Émilion.
So he became a saint, and now we call him a saint.
And then the town took on his name
Well,
because,
yeah.
like in many other cases, the town grew up around the monastery.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it wasn't the other way around. It wasn't that there was a town there first. There was the wine-growing villa, but there was, first of all, this very, very big, important monastery. And then, little by little, what always happens is that you have people who have other kinds of activity that is mostly commercial activity or producing things that come and set up and build their houses right near the monastery, and that is how the towns grow.
Yeah.
So,
Well, somebody had to feed these monks.
well, they always had gardens themselves, you know.
Right, but they were digging holes.
Only
and praying.
Well, but once the monastery church was finished, they didn't
That's
have to
true.
dig
Then
holes
they
anymore.
stopped digging.
Monasteries always have their own gardens. Part of the land around there was very rich. But the other thing that monasteries do, and we know that, of course, from other parts of France, and it was the same there, once they are finished with the digging of making the church, they cultivated the grapes that made the wine. And not only was the wine for their own use,
Consumption.
but they sold the wine. And many of the monasteries made their money by the selling of the wine.
Oh, very good.
Now, what happens is that you get to the period of the 1100s, and this is an area that is fought over by the English and the French. You have Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was married first to the King of France, Louis VII. Then they get divorced. It was actually an annulment, but let's consider it a divorce because she had 2 children by him. And then she marries...
Some sort of annulment.
She marries Henry II of England,
Ah.
who has as a dowry all of Aquitaine
Well, there you go.
and Anjou. She is the most powerful woman in Europe. She's the richest woman. She's a cultivated woman. She is the most powerful woman in Europe. And what does Henry II do? He creates a legal jurisdiction in and around Bordeaux, and particularly in and around the area of Saint Émilion. And he gives the people around Saint Émilion the right to have their own taxes and to create their own laws and to run the area. And in exchange, he requires a certain number of barrels of wine to be sent to first Anjou and then to London and England every year. So figure that in the 1100s, the most important wine was Saint Émilion wine. It wasn't just Bordeaux wines, because people should know that Saint Émilion is one part of the huge region of Bordeaux wines.
Yeah.
And it's a distinctive region in terms of its wines, because each of these areas, and there's the Médoc, and there's the Grave, and there's all these other areas, they all have somewhat different wine tastes and the different combinations of grapes that they use. But I didn't know until I was doing the background information for this that it was from the 1100s on that the Saint Émilion wines were considered to be the very, very best, you see. And
That's
they were
very cool.
actually sent to England. And then, of course, what happens is that if it goes to the court in England and if it goes to the court in Anjou, then everybody else wants it.
Of course. Well, and it's wine. Of course people want it.
And so then the court of France, Louis, who then was, remarried and all this other stuff, they started using the wines from Saint Émilion. And they apparently, I always assumed that it was just Bordeaux wines in general that had been famous from the Middle Ages on. But it was first and foremost the wines from Saint Émilion, which is really fascinating. Now, when you go there, it's a place you can stay. There are lots of lovely little hotels, little, bed and breakfasts even. It's a place where there are lots of English-speaking people who come to visit, and there are obviously English-speaking people who live there because this is a region that is visited enormously by people from the British Isles and even from Americans. But you have lots to see. It's really a full day to be in Saint Émilion because not only do you have this magnificent underground church,
right,
you have other medieval buildings. There's another church. There's the city hall, which is gorgeous. There's a museum of wine, which is absolutely fabulous. And besides going and visiting various chateaus in the outlying area, which of course you can, you have several commerces that are caviste.
Right. So you can go and
taste all these different wines. Right. The caviste
and
would be
they'll probably charge you a little bit of money for tasting all these
yes,
wines.
these are not free. But the difference between a chateau, which is a place where you would taste the wine produced by that specific one house or chateau, is that a caviste will have a selection of many, many different chateaux. And the last time I was in that region, I remember going to one and was able to taste, I think we tasted 3 different ones. I have a hard time after 3 or 4. I really can't follow. My mind doesn't keep up with the different tastes of the different wines after about 3 or 4. But it's really worth it. Now, it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
The region is just rolling hills.
Yeah, the hills are beautiful.
The hills are gorgeous.
The buildings are beautiful too because they use this limestone in everything, and it makes it the white stone with the green of the
green of the land
is it's a really beautiful area.
It's a beautiful area.
Yeah.
Now, just some people are wine people, and it's interesting to know because I know that a lot of people associate certain varieties of grapes with Bordeaux. But what I was interested to learn was that if you go to the Saint Émilion area, the proportions of the different kinds of grapes are different from if you go to the Médoc area, for instance, which I didn't know. And in this particular area, the majority, the most important variety of grape is Merlot.
Yep.
And then you have a very small amount, not very much at all, of Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay.
And then there's a third one, which is a Cabernet. Whoops, I think I wrote it down. Yes, it's called a Cabernet Franc.
Yes.
And those 3 together, with the dominance of the Merlot, make the Saint Émilion, which is interesting because it's a different proportion if you go to Médoc. There's much more Cabernet Sauvignon. Much more, and it's a stronger. They're all reds. This is the region of red wines.
Yes,
this is not a region of white wines, pretty much at all. And yet, I was interested and fascinated by the fact that they have these different proportions. It's like different recipes,
right? And then when I looked for foods that go well with Saint Émilion wines,
right?
I found that anything grilled, grilled meats will go very well with Saint Émilion, but also some fish, some fish with more kind of flavorful fish.
Really?
So the types of fish that we like in France that are more flavorful, we sometimes serve them with Saint Émilion wine.
Oh, really?
More of a calmer kind of wine. But yeah, it can be
because it's a strong wine, even if it's it's not as quite as tannic or strong as a Médoc, but to me, it's a really full-bodied.
It's a
full-bodied wine. Yeah, that's interesting. They say that it's very good with foie gras too, and of course, a lot of people prefer foie gras with
a sweeter wine.
Yeah, but that's interesting.
And wines, it's whatever you like. That's good. If you like it with foie gras, then have it with foie gras, and if you like it with cheese, have it with cheese. Whatever. It's what you like.
If you live in California, you will no longer be able to do that because the Supreme Court has just ruled that California can keep up its ban on foie gras. So you will not be able to have your Saint Émilion with foie gras if you live in California.
That's a shame.
This is for people who are really interested in wines, they should know that Saint Émilion is an area that has 12 Premier Grand Crus.
Yeah.
Which is enormous.
Yeah.
It's absolutely enormous. One of the most famous and one of the most expensive is a wine called the Cheval Blanc, which is one of only 3 or 4 designated Category A of Premier Grand Cru, which is the top of the top of the top.
That probably goes for a few $100s.
Yes,
a bottle.
it does. It really does. There are 63 Grand Cru Classés, which means those are basically just underneath the Premier Grand Cru. And so it's a region that has an enormous amount of prestigious wines. Altogether, this was a statistic that I found a little bit mind-boggling because it's enormous. The Saint Émilion region produces 5,400 hectares of grapes. That's a lot. That's about, let's see, 10, 12, it's about 14,000 acres.
That's a lot, yeah.
That's a lot. It's the biggest wine growing area. Of course, all of Bordeaux together, including the other parts of the Bordeaux, is the biggest wine growing area in the world.
Yeah,
altogether.
It's a lot of wine.
It's a lot of wine. But I thought it was very interesting that Saint Émilion itself produces that many highly rated wines. Now, I just would like to say this because I've had this as an experience. Saint Émilion wines are expensive wines. You will not get a good bottle of Saint Émilion for less than about $30, $35 at all.
Yeah.
If you go to visit Saint Émilion or if you go to a caviste and they're giving you a good, inexpensive bottle of Saint Émilion, don't buy it. It will not be good. I just know by experience that what happens is there are a few, maybe there are bottles that are not purely Saint Émilions because that can happen as well.
But it's an AOC, right?
It's an AOC.
Okay.
But I have had the experience of having a couple of bottles of Saint Émilion
that you didn't think were
I didn't think were worth anything at all. And if you're going to spend a minimum of 20 euros or 25 euros for a bottle of wine, you should be able to get a decent bottle of wine. And obviously what happens is that because there's a huge demand for Saint Émilions by Americans, by Japanese, by Chinese, by people from outside of France who only know Bordeaux wines very often, which is part of the reason why they have such a demand on them.
Yeah.
What happens is that a lot of these places, and especially the caviste, because this is not necessarily the chateaus that produce the actual wine, but what they do is they up the price and they don't necessarily up them in relation to the quality of the wine. So it is something that just have to be, unless you don't know your wines, and it doesn't matter. But I think that considering the variety of prices of wines, especially that we know about in France, don't get had, by having to spend a lot of money for a mediocre bottle of wine that you should know by definition costs a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a...
if it's too good to be true, it probably is too good to be
exactly.
true.
Exactly. In this case, it really is, I think, too good to be true.
Yeah.
The other just little things, there are some still... There are a few vestiges of the old medieval walls around Saint Émilion. The city hall is a building from the 17th century that is a gorgeous classical style architecture.
Yeah, it's very classical.
Very beautiful, beautiful.
Very full of itself.
Very full of itself.
Yes.
And
that's how I
But that's the Saint Émilion, I think, is full of itself.
I mean, it's Saint Émilion, yeah, of course.
And believe it or not, this is in relation to our last podcast, there actually are a small section of catacombs in Saint Émilion.
Well, they have a lot of quarries, so obviously they're going to put creepy stuff in the quarries.
Yeah, and apparently this is the real thing. This is from going back to the beginning of when Émilion and the monks were digging their underground church.
Oh, so they were actually using them for...
So they were really using them as a Christian burial ground. So I thought that was interesting, considering that we've just talked about that a little while ago.
Yeah.
But it has been a World Heritage Site since 1999. And you can get there by taking a train from Bordeaux. You can get there by a bus from Bordeaux. You can take a train from Paris to Libourne. And then there's a tiny little local choo-choo train that will take you to Saint Émilion. But really, if it's possible, one of the best things to do is to have a car and drive around the region and then visit the town. It's a wonderful place to have lunch or dinner, lovely restaurants with, of course, some very good wine.
Of course.
and then spend a day or two in the area. I just think it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's not a cheap area to visit, but if you go to the wine growing areas of California, it's not going to be cheap either.
No.
And so, but it's the real thing. I mean, it's a really genuinely beautiful area, and there's lots to see. I don't know if you can really stop at any of these chateaus and just walk in, or are you supposed to arrange a tour?
Most of the chateaus have signs outside their gates because these are all gated properties.
Of course, yes.
And they will tell you, there will be a sign that will say visitors, and they will give you the hours. Now, there are a few that do not have visitors.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that you can do an open visit to Cheval Blanc, which is it's only by appointment. But there are many, many, many of them that do indeed have certain days or certain hours of the, certain days of the week, certain hours of the day,
Mm-hmm.
just like in the Médoc, where most of them will offer a possibility to visit and do a tasting. And of course, these are tastings that are sometimes free, but most of the time you do have to pay something.
Yeah.
This is not like in some places in the States where you can get a free tasting right away.
These are expensive bottles of wine.
These are expensive bottles of wine.
If they can sell the bottle for €200, they're not going to give it to you for free. I mean, that's just a fact.
But it is lovely, and my experience is that if you drive around, and there is a wine route that is mapped out. If you go to the tourist office in Saint Émilion, they will give you a paper that has what is called the wine route of Saint Émilion, and it will show you the roads to take, and it will indicate the chateaux that are visitable,
open, and when
that
you
are
can
open,
stop
yes,
and all that.
And it's wonderful because generally speaking, they like having people come because it's a good way of getting publicity. The chateaux tend to be a particular style. It's not a castle. These are called chateaux, but this is what is called the Bordelais style of house. It's a low-lying, classical, beautiful architecture made out of limestone, usually very gorgeous, with gorgeous grounds around it. Some of the places, some of the bigger houses will actually have little tables outside so that you can sit outside and have maybe a teeny picnic. It depends.
Right.
But they're absolutely beautiful. And there is a place that is a spa that is extremely, extremely expensive, but is one of the best places you can have wine tasting and spa, and that is the Caudalier.
Caudalier?
Caudalier. Caudalier is it's actually a spa run by the people who owned, I don't know if they still do, Go Sport, the chain of stores called Go Sport. They bought up one of the vineyards in the Saint Émilion area that has an ancient house and an ancient cave. They still produce wine, and they decided, and this goes back, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, about 70 years ago, they decided, because one of the sons was interested in doing research, to create a line of cosmetics using grape pits, grape skins, because apparently it has virtues that are really good for taking care of your skin and things like that.
Okay.
Grapeseed oil is supposed to be very good for you anyway. And so what they did was they opened a spa on the land of one of the vineyards, and it's a hotel and a spa. And the products, the Caudalier products, you actually can buy in almost any pharmacy or parapharmacy anywhere in France. But you can go there and you can have both a meal, a wine tasting, and if you have the means to do it, you can actually stay in their spa.
Wow, very nice.
Which I would love to be able to do one day.
Yeah? You enjoy that sort of thing?
Yes, I do.
You like to be pampered, huh?
I like to be pampered. I mean, a day or two a year is not a lot to be pampered,
Well, I like to be wined and dined. Pampering of the spa sort. Not my thing so much.
I wouldn't mind. If anybody out there wants to offer it, I would be happy to accept.
All right, very good. Well, I think you're done, right?
I think we're done with Saint Émilion.
Excellent. That was very interesting. I can't recommend the place enough. It's very fun for a day visit. If you want to arrange a visit with us, you can write to us, and who knows, we might be able to pull something like that off if Elise has some time.
If I have them.
She's pretty busy.
Not on a rainy day. It's too slippery. The steps and stones are so slippery.
Well, how will they know if it's a rainy day or not?
I don't know.
Nobody can know.
You have to be a mind reader, I think.
I have to say, the month of September and October in France,
it's wonderful.
southwestern France, have been amazing. I think we had a pretty nasty May, June, July even.
Yeah.
It was rainy and not so nice. But September and October have been glorious. Hardly any rain, lots of sunshine. It's warm, not too hot. It's perfect. So I think this confirms the trend that if you have to choose between coming to France between May and October, you might want to consider October. The weather has been really, really, really good.
The last couple of years, we've had really rainy springs and beautiful end of summers and all falls.
Yeah, the fall has been really dry and lovely recently. I don't know if it's a trend that will last.
I don't know if it's a trend that will last. I think it's part of the global change of climate. But it definitely does seem to be a better time to come.
Yeah. These days, it's a good time to come. All right. Well, I want to remind everybody that if you would like to support the show, we would love it if you would go to joinusinfrance.com/Amazon, click on your country flag, and if you're going to be buying stuff from Amazon anyway, which, the holidays are getting near, probably a lot of you are going to do that. If you go through our website first, you don't pay a penny more, and we get a small commission, which helps us pay for the expenses of having the show on.
And it reminds us that you care about us.
Exactly. And we like it when people do that. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next week. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Okay, now here's the promised interview at the end of the show that I told you about. Hello, Gavin.
Hi, Annie. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great.
It's wonderful to talk to you. Now, I have to tell everybody why I've got you on the phone today. Gavin is a listener from Colorado who wrote in to ask a question a couple of weeks ago, and I answered it. And he's been very happy to talk back and forth, which is really fun. It doesn't happen that much with listeners. We know we have a ton of listeners, but most of you are really quiet. But Gavin is a talkative guy, so that's great. And then a few days ago, Gavin told me he wanted to give back, and I thought, how nice. I had no preconceived notion what you were going to do. And then a couple days ago, you sent me your giving back. Do you want to tell us what you did for the website and for the show?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast and learning a lot more about the area, and it just really helps us become excited for our upcoming trip.
Right.
And after listening to all the podcasts, I thought, man, this is just a ton of great information for free, and I need to do a little something to give back. So what I thought was, what would be helpful for me? And so I, being kind of a technical geek that I am, I went to Google Maps, and I went to all the show notes from the 39 podcasts, and I created a map that has markers for all the places you guys have mentioned.
That's right.
And so there's a map out there that has 120 different spots, and it's all organized by the episodes.
Yep.
And so I thought this would be really helpful for others, that if you're looking at the map and you know you're going to go to a place and you find a marker there, you can click on the marker and quickly get a link back to the podcast page and then the podcast itself.
Right. And, I might end up using this because sometimes I don't even remember all the places that we've mentioned, because we do talk about a lot of different places. And I had been thinking for several weeks that I should add some sort of map, some way to help listeners figure it out visually. And I never had the time, and I kept putting it off, and then it appeared. I'm so excited. This is wonderful. This is wonderful.
Well, you're welcome. One thing I'm looking forward to on our trip is enjoying the local foods and pastries of the places we go. And so as you've mentioned them, we've got a little marker there in that region to say, hey, when you're here, make sure you try a kouign-amann.
That's right.
So...
No, it's really cool, and it makes it really easy because the way he's done it, and I really invite you to go to the website to look at it. I added a big old blue button that says episodes map, and the way he's done it is when you click on any of those little pins that are on the map, it'll open up a little dialogue that will take you right to the episode where we talked about it, which is really cool. And then most likely, if we talked about it, you can search the show notes to find that name again. You can look through. So it'll make everybody's life a lot easier. I think it's great.
Well, it was fun. When you talked about the passages and the galleries, I didn't know where they all were, but when I mapped them all out, they're all within a really close area. I mean,
That's right.
You could walk to 7 of them. And so just for me, it was helpful for me to get my bearings and prepare for our trip too.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you a million, Gavin. You've really helped us out tremendously. And so if we have other geniuses out there that are wonderful with our listenership, feel free to do great things for us. We love it.
I agree. Give back.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Gavin, and it's been lovely to talk to you. And don't hesitate to ask more questions because we love you forever. And have a wonderful time with your. It's your anniversary trip, right?
It is, yeah. It's coming up in May, so we still have some time to prepare.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You have plenty of time to prepare. And honestly, I think I don't know about you, but one of the things that I enjoy the most about travel is the anticipation and the preparation, because I just like thinking about my upcoming holiday for a long time. So, and also, I think if you're prepared, you really get more out of your trip than if you just show up. I mean, there's places where I've shown up and I don't know very much about it, and I just didn't know that there was this fantastic thing I could have done in that place, but I just didn't know about it, So I went and I missed it. So I think it's really important to prepare. So kudos to you for all of that.
And thanks for your helping us preparing.
You are very welcome. Okay, this time the show is over. Thanks, listener. Talk to you next week. Bye. Can you say au revoir?
Au revoir.
Bravo, Kevin. All right. Bye-bye and thank you.
Bye.